And that leads us very nicely, I think, onto the next dimension, which is commercial. And I imagine that this is one that is maybe newest and freshest for people coming up through the ranks, as it were, because I think, and again, I like to oversimplify, but as you're coming up through the ranks, you're almost following orders. You're sort of saying, "Here's a business goal, do something to make it happen." But as you become more senior, you're part of the. You're not only responsible for the commercial success of the company, but maybe you're also making big decisions around how you will achieve that.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite examples actually for the difference between a regular engineer and a staff or principal engineer who's also making big architectural decisions, which tend to be made by engineers these days. We're luckily
Yep.
moved away from the ivory tower PowerPoint soldier archetype
We
that
love them.
existed for a while. Yeah, um, too many slides.
Yep.
But I think that one of the things that's really important when you're making major architectural decisions is, cool, what's it going to cost?
Right.
You can make choices that mean that your hosting costs are going to go through the roof, that your observability costs are going to go through the roof. I've been at organizations where they're spending as much on Datadog as they are on AWS,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yep.
Then that's a easy trap to fall into. And so I think that commercial understanding becomes very important when you're making bigger architectural decisions, when you're making these days when you're making decisions about what to use which type of AI for. It's often much more expensive to use LLMs than to use traditional machine learning, and I think these increasingly become part of the equation. What's the return on investment, what's the payback period, and you start to need to talk in those type of terms that are financial terms. They're what you learn from talking with your CFO. It's, can you read a profit and loss statement? Do you understand how your company is actually doing right now? And I think that it's very common actually for people not to have any idea how the company is doing and just to think my job's just to ship the roadmap.
Yeah.
Like I'll just get done what I'm asked to do and hope that the people who decided that we should do it were right. And I think the more senior you get, the more involved you are in those discussions and those trade-offs. And they are trade-offs, right? Like I said earlier, one of the great joys of Monzo was how incredibly high the technical talent bar was. But it opened up a whole bunch of architectural options that in another company that couldn't afford engineers that good wouldn't have been possible.
Mm.
It just wouldn't have been reasonable to expect them to deal with the level of complexity that some of those choices indicated. So, Monzo for a long time was one of the largest ever Cassandra users, and that was one of the innovation tokens. The big bets that they made was like, what, eventual consistency, this style of database and this particular technology will be the key to where we go. And it's one of the reasons that Monzo, you pay in store and you probably trust that it's gonna come up in your app faster than it comes up on the terminal.
Yeah.
And you probably trust that your payments and your direct debits and everything else, like you can have real-time visibility of your money in a way that many traditional banks have no way of doing. They've got
Yeah.
batch processing that happens at 4 a.m. and that's when things are going to update. They're not going to be done in real time, and that was a commercial choice as much as it was a technology choice, and a really important one for the business in the end.
And it's interesting, as you were explaining that, one thought I had was earlier on, we spoke about moving technology away from being a cost center, but something which, delivers value. And you touched on Datadog, and Datadog can be really, really expensive, but
Yeah,
and again, I'm oversimplifying. I've been in situations where we have saved a bit of money, but then you have an incident and you go, why? So it's
yeah,
almost like an insurance.
yeah,
So it's for the right situation, it can be a really valuable expense because of the protection it affords you.
yeah.
How, in this commercial dimension, as a technology leader, how do you explain all of those things? I think a CFO will look at the AWS bill and go, yeah, I get it completely. But this big thing, Datadog,
Yeah, what's that for?
talk me through that.
Yeah. And I think that you have to learn to speak in their language in order to help it make sense, right? And so the way that I have explained things like observability in the past is to go, you've got to imagine that the main system is our financial accounts, but the observability is our management information. Like that's the difference here. So one of them is just the bare bones, exactly what's happening. But when you're trying to add meaning to it, you need a different view on the data. This is that different
Yeah.
view on the data for us as engineers. And that then they go, okay, if I think of it as management information reporting, then I understand that it's an additional thing that's needed. And when they look at their own costs in finance, they've obviously got a load of costs related to the bare bones accounting, but they also have a load of people building dashboards and
Yep.
reports and making sure budget owners know what they've spent and whether they've got any money left and all of those kind of things, right? And so I think part of the value of this commercial skill set is to learn the language of the other functions, and to learn the language of sales, the language of finance, the language of marketing, and be able to translate better for them. And I think that's one of the big roles that we have as CTOs, as technical leaders, is we look after a thing that bluntly not everybody wants to understand and not everybody
Hmm.
can take the time to understand. I'm sure they're all capable, but whether they're, in their day to day, do they have time to need to learn exactly what the difference between, Swift and various different programming languages or frameworks or whatever else? We have to be able to put it in terms that are understandable to the broader business. And I think that that's really important. And so I think in this commercial thing it's about, a lot of it's about finance, but it's also just about general business understanding. And you can make choices in technology that will be the difference between your company being profitable and not,
Yeah.
or certainly when they're going to get profitable and not.
And to what degree is commercial awareness a factor of experience? So, very simplistically, I'm an engineer, I've got zero experience, put me into a CTO role, I'm going to be zero. Whereas someone like you, you've been, in senior leadership positions for a number of years, you've been in the room and you understand, it's just a factor of your experience and time served rather than sort of context and peculiarities of this particular role.
I think that's one way to gain that understanding. I think there are other ways though. When I was at university, I did a course called Accounting for Non-Accounting Students, and there's a book by the same name that's fantastic. And
I
so
think I have it actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
I came out of university understanding how to read a P&L, and
Yep.
my mum was an accountant, my dad's a mechanical engineer. Like I've never been scared of numbers or scared of understanding how things really work, and that's been a real advantage to me in my career. And so I think some of it you can book learn, some of it you can skills exchange. The VP of finance at Moo and I got very close, and I taught him a load about tech and why our capitalization was really difficult to do, and he taught me a load about finance and VCs and investors and how our investor relations was working, which I hadn't had that exposure at P&G or in the government, because it's a very different environment. You're
Yep.
not doing investor relations, even if you're very senior at P&G. It's a very top level thing to get involved in, and it's a specialist department as well in that kind of context, because it's such a large company. And so I think that there's lots of ways to learn this. Some of it you can just absorb by osmosis over many, many years. But if you are putting yourself in a situation where you're going from being a regular engineer in a product team to then making big architectural decisions, or maybe you're in a platform team now or similar, you can choose to go learn it. And I think it's I did a session a few years ago at Leading Edge, which is the sort of director plus version of lead dev, that was basically like commercial basics for engineering leaders. And it's probably the session I got the most positive feedback on that I've ever done in my life, because it was simply explaining a bunch of stuff that people kind of had been exposed to, because it was
Yeah.
a room full of directors and above. They're all managers of managers, but not all of them really understood, like, why are we doing capitalization?
Yep.
What is this R&D tax credit thing for?
Yeah.
I get that we get some money back. I have to write some big reports, but like, why? Why do we get money back? What's the government's trying to incentivize us to innovate? This is why this thing exists. People have taken advantage of it a bit, so they're pulling back on it now, and like that kind of thing. And so I don't think the only way is to just sit back and wait for it to come to you. I think you can go to it as well.
And it sounds like almost a competitive advantage for you if you have invested the time and you can show up with that.